Ministry has taken a proactive stance in shaping the conditions of that cooperation and competition with China and within the mandate and the constitutional constraints that we have in Germany on these issues. Let me quote Minister Stark-Watzinger commenting on Germany's new China strategy, and obviously you start with the obligatory China must be seen in the triad as a partner, competitor and systemic rival. But then you mention, particularly in the fields of science and research, we must note China's shift from a partner to competitor and systemic rival. With the China strategy, we are now setting guardrails to position ourselves confidently, address these challenges and give science an overarching orientation in dealing with China. We very much look forward to your keynote speech tonight and then to the panel discussion, and we look forward to the conversation with all of you tonight. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Dr. Huotari, ladies and gentlemen. Someone who was familiar with historic turning points once said, "There are things that we could learn from the Chinese. In their language, the character that denotes both crisis and opportunity is one and the same." That was our former president, Richard von Weizsäcker. That was when China still had its one-child policy, poverty, illiteracy, and above all in rural areas. And in German school textbooks, the chapter China, a developing country. 6 federal presidents later, we use different words when talking about the People's Republic. Partner, that was already mentioned, partner, competitor, and now increasingly systemic rival. And this happens here at MERICS on the basis of detailed knowledge as well as of direct experience. However, this change has not fully established itself in the general consciousness. Above all, not the simultaneousness of what a country can be for us. Is it only a competitor or more a rival? We like to think in terms of either or, for or against. But the fact is, it is not as simple as that when we or you live in a multipolar world. And when you take the enormous impact of geopolitical changes into account, I'm talking about Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and parallel simmering conflicts, I'm talking about Taiwan. Of course, we could look at these complex situations and, despair in a way, or we can do something quite different. That is to consider what people have been capable of achieving in times of crisis, new beginnings, unexpected achievements. Just one example, in 1 month, we will be celebrating the 3rd of October again, our day of German unity and the huge task of reconstruction. And for this reason, I do not want to promote anxieties, but to analyze what we can do to build our strength. I don't want to underestimate crises, but nor do I want to make them the focus of all our thoughts. Instead, to look for opportunities and then to take action quickly. So let's turn our attention to China. Don't worry, we don't start at square one. You mentioned that already. We have the framework for the analysis with the China strategy and the national security strategy. With these, the federal government has opened a new chapter in full public view and talks about it very openly, about the Zeitenwende, the historic turning point, marked by Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine last year, about geopolitical dynamics, which had already become apparent at an earlier stage, but which had not had such prominence on the policy agenda previously. And if you look closely, you can see that we are no longer the country that publicly celebrates every German-Chinese collaboration, but where we are also not yet there where maybe MERICS has wanted to see us since its founding 10 years ago. With an all-around nuanced picture of China, with all the readjustments which that will mean for us. Yes, readjustments, seems to me the appropriate expression here. What strengths should we scale up? What strength must be developed? And at the same time, what weakness should we tone down? I've brought my top five for you, if you want to say so. So my first point could also cover all my points, and that is more self-confidence, backed, of course, by ambitions. This is what we need, and there's every reason for this, particularly when it concerns competition between systems, because our great advantage is our freedom. The freedom of the individual ends only where it impinges on the freedom of others, not at the limits of an ideology, nor those of a ruler. And for me, in my role as Minister of Education and Research, the freedom of science is of fundamental importance. We have an open science system with close links to many parts of the world. And add to this, the autonomy of our higher education institutions, the open culture of debate that is ubiquitous, freedom of expression and of the press. And let me say that loud and clearly. Freedom of expression and press is, and it will all be the key indicator for cooperations, because it shows if people are really free and if researchers are free to speak up. In our country, there is freedom of thought, freedom of ideas, freedom of individual development, and this creates an enormous reservoir of innovations, startups, progress, you name it. And I'm convinced that there is no greater creative force. Freedom is our greatest competitive advantage at all, and this is why we have to defend it. Autocracies, of course, take a very different view. Someone who can give orders has so much power, the what, the when, the where, and the who. There is no doubt that one can go far with harshness and discipline, but often what gets left by the wayside is precisely that which makes people grow above themselves, wanting to realize their imagination, their dreams, and their passion. Just remember the COVID-19 pandemic. When it began, many people wondered, who will get through it better? The liberal democracies with their sometimes cumbersome coordination process, or the dictatorships with their curt announcements. I think we've seen the result lately. We know the outcome. And let me say that as well, loud and clearly. Democracy, it might be exhausting. It might sometimes take a longer time, but it is the best form of government there is, because beyond human rights, of course, progress is possible over misstep, and this is something we also have to keep up in relationships. So my position remains the same. Have ambitions, think big. The vaccine that was developed in free democratic countries with strong researchers, only possible by basic funding, curiosity-driven research, shows what we can do. It is self-confidence what we need. What other role would we want to have in a multipolar world? Between giants like China, India, or the USA? Whether we measure them in population size or in GDP, or between groups which form strategic groupings where the need arises. Take BRICS, for example. And only if we aim high, we will be able to compete at that level as Germans, and above all, as Europeans. So let us stop visualizing all our problems piling up before us. Instead, let us work at achieving successes. And I'm certain that we are capable of that. Take, for example, LNG terminals, or the European Chips Act, where we try to work together in a very important field. On my summer tour, I visited the Trumpf company in Stuttgart. It provides special laser technology for the production of high-tech chips. This is something China can only dream about. At Trumpf, the message was clear. We are part of a delivery chain in both directions. We don't just have needs, we also have something to offer. And we are in a position to decide who we sell it to and who not. Such examples need to become the norm. More self-confidence, more self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, in this land of car makers, I think it's fitting to say that we want to continue having our horsepower, but we must find new ways of putting it on the road, as we just see at the ERR. Innovation is the key. As I like to say, innovation policy is the best industrial policy we have. So we are fortunate in having an excellent science system, but that alone is not enough. We also need excellent knowledge transfer to make us strong, and that is my second point. Good ideas plus added value. And something that can be repeated, can't be repeated enough, a whole new tempo. This is not a simple task for Germany. For decades, our thoroughness has served us very well. For a long time, it was one ingredient in the winning formula, made in Germany. But today, it is often a hindrance. Excessive bureaucracy, lengthy decision-making processes, plus the slow pace of digitalization, all this hinders innovation, hinders entrepreneurship. In the meantime, it's showing up in the statistics. We are still good, but we are living off the past. The future belongs to those who look to tomorrow. And besides, our competitors are very fast. China is long since more than just a world champion in copying, but it is moving into the market with its own high-tech products, pursuing highly ambitious goals. You are all aware of the Made in China 2025 agenda, and certainly also the dual circulation strategy, becoming self-reliant in terms of technology and resources. So this means it's all the more important that we do more to reassume the lead. This is something that we are also very concerned within our research ministry. Hence our future research and innovation strategy. It looks at the world the way it is, with all the crises, bottlenecks, and disruptions. But it also looks forward. And it was important to me that it has a systemic outlook and that we work on specific missions. The future needs not only freedom, the future also needs focus, clear objectives, clear pooling of resources, clarity about the cooperation between ministry, and clarity for all stakeholders. I count MERICS as one of these. One of the missions is called technological sovereignty, which brings me to the third readjustment. We need more sovereignty when it comes to key technologies, which is not the same as complete self-sufficiency, by the way. And in the case of innovation policy, this means de-risking, not decoupling, you heard that before, and certainly not deglobalizing, as some still think. The fact is, it is more important than ever that we look for partners who share our values when it comes to innovation and transfer. The G7 is an important forum for this, and of course, the EU too. For example, new breeding technologies, the reorientation of the European legal framework on genetic engineering, just being one segment of biotechnology, or international partners for the scale-up of green hydrogen. From Australia to Canada, my trips and that of my colleagues in the recent month had the same goals: aligning interests, agreeing concrete collaboration, strengthening partners who share our values, such as Taiwan, creating new space for maneuver. Innovation and transfer made in Germany thrive on strong partnerships. The fourth point, which I think needs readjustment, our openness to different technologies. This is not just a luxury option for better times, not a nice to have. Quite the opposite. Technology neutrality provides us with a range of options, which is precisely what we need in times of crisis. None of us has a crystal ball. None of us knows, for example, if or when exactly fusion energy will become practicable. But because of that, we should give up one opportunity for solving our energy problem, not even give it a try. With this kind of attitude, we would never have invented the aeroplane, and I'm very glad that I'm not the only fan of Otto Lilienthal, I have to say. And I think we need more of, like Kennedy said, We are not going there because it's easy, but because it is difficult. As regards fusion, there are now many others on our side, from industry in particular. We are all doing what we can to pave the way for a fusion power plant, to realize a human dream. This time it's not about flying too close to the sun, but rather bringing the power of the sun down to us on Earth. So what we have to achieve to become strong and be competitive is openness to different technologies. It is a must, as indispensable as basic scientific research. Ladies and gentlemen, when I recently wrote a piece for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung newspaper on research in China, the themes were interference, misappropriation of intellectual property, abuse of research. Our science system must protect itself against this more actively and alertly than before, because we cannot afford to be ignorant or to be too trusting. And this is my fifth point. My appeal to the science community: ask yourself, what are the red lines for your specific projects? Where do you draw them, and how do you maintain them? And thank you to everyone who is now paying particular attention, for example, among the CSC fellows at Erlangen-Nuremberg. The basis for good decisions is greater knowledge, which is most fundamental in our relationship to China. Our ministry has held already more than 60 events to make universities fit for China 2023, and if 600 are needed, then that is what we will do. Who better to know this than you are here at MERICS? China expertise is now more than ever future expertise. So, ladies and gentlemen, more self-confidence, more knowledge transfer, making us ourselves stronger, more technological sovereignty, more openness to different technologies, but more protection of our research. These are my top 5 for the topic of competitiveness today. And naturally, I'm not claiming that it is a complete list after all. This is why we're going to have now the panel. So I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you so much. Minister, thank you so much for a very passionate plea for a rethinking, I think, that it was, of German science policy, or at least a readjustment, as you've called it. We're absolutely excited to now have an open discussion with leading representatives also here in the room of the science community. But I want to start with Professor Edler at Fraunhofer Institute of Systems and Innovation. And you are at the forefront, not just in thinking about the practice of global science and innovation, but also entangled with a large set of research institutions, the Fraunhofer Institutes, that play a very active role in engaging with China. And we look forward to hearing from you about how you think about issues that have been discussed just now. Technological sovereignty is something that you've worked on and intensely advised on. So looking forward to your views and perspectives on these issues. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Huotari, and thank you very much to the organizers for having me here, and thank you very much for your speech that almost surprised me a little bit in how strong it was in terms of self-confidence and appeal to our own strengths, which is something I would have said or will say as well. So I'm very glad about that not just analyzing the others, but appealing to our own strengths. I mean, this event and also the speech shows the importance of understanding the Chinese STI system in many ways, not just in terms of capacity, but also in terms of institutions. We talked a lot about institutional logics, and it's very important for us to understand them, not only to look at the Chinese, but we have to understand them. And then it's very important to strategize. what does it mean for us, what we observe there? And this is complex. And I also think it's very important that we not only talk about China, but we talk with China. We have Chinese colleagues here, which I really think is fantastic. And it's also important that we not only talk about German and China, but also we have transatlantic cooperation, which I think is fantastic. And maybe in the next iteration of this, we broaden it even a bit more because it's global, it's not just a trilateral. So, I mean, starting observations very short, we seem to all know that, but I think it's very important to keep that in mind. And I'm looking outward, not so much on the German or European system. I mean, there are two developments that are slightly going in diverse direction. One is China is on its way to be a very, very strong science player, internationally an extremely strong science player. And at the same time, it is more technologically self-reliant. So in terms of science, if you look at publications, and Silvia has said it earlier, others have said it, in many, many areas, they have the biggest share of publications. In terms of quality, they might not be just there, but the quantity and the quality they already have, in combination, they are an extremely strong player. We cannot deny that in some areas, they are absolutely leading edge. And in a small survey we've done in Germany 2 years ago, I think, it might be different now, but the results were that in some areas, China is seen as an extremely attractive host for ambitious scientists. They want to be there because there's some kind of infrastructure that is absolutely leading edge. And they get all the kind of support they get. So it's just an extremely important scientific player. At the same time, more technological self-reliance. We've heard this all day. You haven't been there, but I mean, you made a similar statement. So that is actually really interesting. And there are a lot of indicators that show that, be it international co-operating, be it international ownership of Chinese inventions, and so on. And at the same time, the ecosystem in China seems to develop more towards an OECD structure, which means that there's much more cooperation within the system, and that there's more patenting by research organizations and more patenting by SMEs. So both from basic science and from SMEs, more technological competence. So there is something going on here, self-reliance on the one hand and a strong international scientific player. Even if the publication patterns are changing between US and China, they are broadening. So they will remain a strong international scientific player, period. And we have to take note of that. So I now make a separation, which I maybe should not make. And so at the end I will say, forget about the separation. But in terms of science and technology, we have to think maybe slightly a bit different in terms of cooperation rationales, be it for science and be it for technology. And dare I say, be it for challenge-oriented economic development, that's maybe something we haven't talked too much about it. But in terms of science, of course, we have, in regard of what I just said, we have to take advantage of the scientific potential of China. And that, of course, has tensions, the way we deal with it. And you've mentioned the tension, Silvia has mentioned the tension before, which is freedom of science. So we, of course, have all kinds of freedoms to do what we want to do in this system, and that should involve also choosing the partners we want to choose and have a division of labor that is most productive. And then, of course, the tension is responsibility towards the system competition and towards our own values and interests. But this is a very tricky topic because the tension manifests differently at different levels for the individual, for the organization, for the country. So we need to take care of that. And then, of course, the second one on technology. How do we navigate technology sovereignty? And we've just heard Trump, who said, well, if you're not in China, in the high-tech areas where we are, then you cannot be a global leader. That's what he said. You have to be in China, in the Chinese market. So we have the need for technological trade, for buying there. We have a need for fast diffusion of all these technologies that we need. At the same time, of course, we have also the responsibility to think what are these technologies for and what is happening when we are too close. So there are tensions, and that are really challenges for policy for all of us. And so what does it mean now for science? And try to speed up. I mean, we have to define more consciously the areas of mutual interest and the areas where we don't. I was in a nice conference in May in Berlin as well, and VW General Secretary Schütte, who was in the BMBF earlier, he made a nice analogy. He said, why don't we try to go towards 3 baskets, where we have a basket of scientific areas that are so tricky, we better don't touch it. We go to China and say, these are the areas where we actually don't even talk because it's for all kinds of reasons. And then there's a basket where we could be, pretty relaxed about cooperation. Then there's a basket where we have to be on a case by case. So, but this, of course, means we have to be very strategic about these things, and freedom of science on the one hand, but on the other hand, being strategic. And then also, of course, and I have to say this as a Fraunhofer, but I'm not talking on behalf of the Fraunhofer Society, I'm talking on behalf of myself. We have to support the science system as well, I think, because we are struggling with it. And I wasn't aware of your university trips, 60 of these events. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to do, and we need to build up an infrastructure that helps our organizations to deal with that. And of course, building up the strong Chinese expertise. You said it's in the China strategy. I would be even bolder with it and saying, it MERICS, yes, but there is more and broader competence needed in our German system when it comes to China. In terms of technology, that is more tricky for me, I have to say. And we talked about technology sovereignty, and we've worked on it, and we've discussed with all kinds of ministries across the whole world almost. It's in every country. It's not only because of China, but of course it has to do with China. But it means in the very end that we have to be very selective. Not every technology can be critical. But for what is it's critical, we seem to think it's critical in terms of competitiveness, but it's critical also in terms of our transformations. Some of these things we want to do in terms of our energy transformation. At the moment, we cannot do without China. It's just a fact. It has to do with competitiveness. It has to do with what we want as our society. We want this transformation. So cutting all the ties would be a real issue. And then, of course, there are other things in terms of what the ability of the state to act in terms of security and health and so on. That's another area. So we have to be very careful and elaborate when it comes to technology sovereignty. And sometimes, for me, the discussion is a bit too simplistic, and we have to be selective. What is clear, of course, if we think about technology sovereignty, for China case, it is special because there is an additional dimension that we seem to neglect sometimes on this. It's a normative one, you mentioned it. But even, if everything is fine in terms of mutual dependency, we might still not want to do it because it's used in ways that we don't want it to be used. So that's an additional point in terms of technology sovereignty. The China strategy, in that respect, I think I like, because you are very clear. It says we don't establish 2 technological spheres. We don't decouple, but we try case by case, area by area, and I think that's absolutely important. I also noted down defined positions of strength, but that is what you already did. And maybe to finish on the technology side, we have to be much more elaborate in terms of strategic intelligence. Where really do we have a detrimental loss? Where really is China leading edge, or could we have substitute partners? We just need to know even more. And I know there are units in your ministry. We are doing the stuff, MERICS and others, but we just need to continue to do that to understand our systems better. I'm finishing now. When I wrote my PhD many years ago, I looked at the history of European technology policy, and I observed it ever since. And we've had these kind of critical moments. In 1967, we didn't even have the European community in the sense that we have it now. There was le défi américain. It was the American challenge, and Europe is falling behind. In 1985, it was the Japanese. Europe is falling behind. And now it's China. But this has a different quality. It has totally a different quality in the geopolitical discussion. And so we have to be very clear. It's not just the same old. It's a new challenge. And that's why I think the China strategy is important. But we have to, I think, put a bit more effort because Germany is the most exposed country. When maybe one weak point of the strategy, maybe there are more, but the one I want to stress here is Europe. You start with Europe, 2 pages, and I was delighted to see that Europe is. But when you look at what it is, we see that we struggle with that. I mean, we struggle with it. We have to be careful. We have to be clear. There is a report has come out earlier this year, different exposure to the Chinese economy and technology. It's very different across Europe. So what does a European approach mean? It's a tricky question for you, I know, but it's something we have to keep in mind. It's not we are not aligned with our interest. I think the strategy is a very good basis. I really do think so. But of course, we now need to be more concrete. How can we support better? How can we do better strategic intelligence? without China bashing, just be grown-ups, I like the fact that it's about interests and about values. Both of it is there, and it's cross-governmental. So I really do hope the framework is now living up its expectations through the operationalization of concrete support. Let me give my remarks to your strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Edler, for this comprehensive overview of your perspective. And I want to turn to Barry Norton, who certainly is a grown-up in the field of China research. You could speak on the issue, obviously, of what the scale of the China challenge in terms of its innovation and industrial policy is, what the intensity of and the degree of changes that we are seeing. But you also speak here tonight, I think, as a US representative who listens to a debate, and I want to hear from you how that resonates with you and the debates that are taking place. You sit at UCSD, a university that's deeply entangled with Chinese counterparts, but at the same time hosts one of the most important centers for China excellence and is at the leading edge of certain technology developments. So I think no one better tonight here to share a US perspective on these issues, and I look forward to your short comment before we open up to the audience. So prepare your questions and raise your hands. Thank you.
Mikko, thanks for those incredibly generous introductory remarks. Thanks. I would like to talk about the United States, if it's okay, because I think it must be kind of odd looking at the United States from across the Atlantic, particularly because voices in Washington, D.C. are so loud and are amplified by the media so often. So, and also maybe the characteristic flaw in American self-analysis is the opposite of the characteristic German flaw. We tend to be overconfident, particularly I think when people look at science and technology in relation to China. I think very, very few Americans and very, very few American politicians understand what China has achieved and how much there is mutual gain between the two countries. In fact, let me start by stressing the fact that the United States and China in the academic arena have gone through an incredible golden era. The degree of collaboration, the degree of intertwining of these two scientific systems is really, I think, pretty much unprecedented globally. And it was based initially upon very, very clear, concrete benefits that American universities received from collaboration with China. Let me list four really quickly. Somebody said before, expensive facilities that the Chinese government paid for, nice labs with all kinds of equipment, including there was a lab in Shanghai that once had 10,000 genetically identical rabbits that were made available for experimentation in gene processing. Very good facility. Chinese capability to quickly produce prototypes and ramp up sample production. So you've got an engineer in their lab in California, and they're saying, "Oh, let's see if it works. Let's go to China and produce a prototype." Lax regulatory environment, which, okay, that's not 100% good, but if you want to study fusion energy, it helps to have a facilitating local government, and China attracted the best fusion researchers in the United States by giving them a little bit more freedom to work on fusion mechanics in China than they had in the United States. And of course, a skilled workforce that was relatively cheap by global standards, including engineers and things like that. So the entanglement between American universities and the Chinese research facilities was extraordinary. Every single major American research university in almost every department was interrelated with their Chinese colleagues. And everybody knew this, and it was fine until it wasn't, right? And of course, there are very good reasons why it wasn't. We all understand, I think, the need for this change. It was certainly adopted in a really abrupt and difficult way by the Trump administration. But, pretty much there's a strong consensus. I think, listening to my colleagues here, both in Europe and the United States, that we need a very different kind of research relationship with China. So I certainly support the change, but we also have to acknowledge that the way it happened in the United States was pretty tough. It was pretty tough on a lot of Chinese American scientists. It was pretty tough on a lot of Chinese Americans, period, because it was really not fair in some fundamental sense. Now, if we think of those benefits, which were very, very real and very, very concrete, but of course those benefits were founded on something much more fundamental, right? And that was the flow of hundreds of thousands of top quality Chinese graduate students to American universities. And those graduate students, first of all, they were just great on their own. But second, when they went, and when they stayed, they contributed enormously to American innovation capacity. And when they went back, of course they contributed to China's innovation capacity, but they also underpinned this kind of collaboration. They underpinned all these other things: quick prototyping, expensive research facilities, access to regulatory preferences, all those things, right? All of the material benefits to this great collaborative system were underpinned by this steady flow of great Chinese graduate students, many of whom became young assistant professors in the United States, and many of whom stayed and got tenure and became prominent scientists. So that process is sort of seriously under threat today. We haven't done a very good job in this you're talking about sort of starting this process here in Germany. We started it, but we did a terrible job. And we have to sort of go back and rethink it. And I think the clear objective, I mean, if you really want to look at this purely from national interest standpoint, then the interest of each of our countries is to attract as many as possible of the best students and keep as many as possible. You know, it's pretty clear. These are the smartest people in the world, not just Chinese, everywhere, right? There is a research elite, and the more of those people that we can get productively working in our countries, the stronger we're going to be. I don't see that way of thinking making much progress in the United States. Certainly people in universities see it, they understand it. One problem in the United States is that it's so entangled with immigration policy. And of course, immigration policy is sensitive everywhere, but in the United States, we're in this absolute deadlock, right? Where Democrats don't want to make partial reforms because they want a comprehensive reform of the immigration system, and Republicans don't want to make any reforms because they want to burnish their credentials as nationalists and to a certain extent nativists. So we're in a deadlock. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. I actually think that's an opportunity for Europe. And my advice is take advantage of our political dysfunction and see how many great Chinese graduate students you can attract with the understanding that they would then choose freedom and become new Germans, new Europeans, because that's just an incredible, incredible opportunity. Yeah, maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you. I think that was a perfect moment to stop. Contested advice for sure, but I'm looking at hands in the room for questions. If there's no immediate question, yes, I see two. I think we should have a microphone handed over there. Yes, perfect, thank you. And if you could introduce yourself quickly, thank you.
Testing, okay. Hi, I'm Clark Bannock. I'm actually a Futures Fellow here at MERICS, and I had a question following up on these 5 big points. One of them that was made that we hear a lot about is knowledge transfer. And I was curious, you know, are there any kind of concrete mechanisms or policies you can think of? Because as a person who lives in the academic sphere, you know, those are words that we hear all the time. We want to promote knowledge transfer. We want to, but when it comes to getting money to do those types of things or to engage in those types of activities, they are usually pushed aside. And so I was curious if it's a big priority, you know, are there any kind of ideas or clear mechanisms that might enable that type of activity?
Thank you for that question. I would take at least one more to also give you the space to prioritize. Yes, maybe they're in the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Marina Rudiak, Heidelberg University and Decoding China Dictionary. I was very happy to hear that you say China expertise is future expertise, and I happen to be one of the people who try to build that up at the university. The problem is, and as you probably know, the numbers of sinology in China studies students are dropping dramatically. And of course, and this is the question that Mikko would probably ask me in return, do you need Chinese language skills to be knowledgeable in China? No, you don't need, as long as there is enough second-hand translated knowledge. And this is, I think, our problem that's going to be in the future. We are not going to have these people. And the Chinese government is obviously very strategic in deciding what it's translating and what it's not translating. So the question is, you know, having you here as the Minister of Education, what do you have in your basket to help us build this future China expertise? Also because, and this is maybe kind of directed to Professor Edler, it's not only about defending ourselves from China, but it's also about our access to China. Only when we are in contact and in communication do we know what's actually going on there. And again, we need China expertise to understand, also to understand when they speak English. So kind of, yeah, maybe my question to you both, what do we need to build this strategic expertise?
Two big questions, technology transfer and China knowledge and expertise. How do we build this up? First to you, I think, Minister.
Yeah, it is working. Thank you for your question. I fully understand your desperation so that we always talk about it, and we haven't yet achieved where we are going to. Let me tackle two areas. First of all, we see that 2/3 of our research and development investments in Germany come from the private industry. So we also have to foster the strength there to give them room, freedom, and also the tax benefits we are increasing now to the space to do research and development. But coming back to what we do in our ministry. First of all, we heard quite a bit about why researchers go to China. And I think this is something that can be easily addressed even without money. Having innovative, friendly regulation, test areas where you can get your ideas out of the laboratory or out of the shelf of whatever, it not necessarily needs technology transfer, and have it tested easily. We need these bridges, these innovation bridges. We've got two flagship projects already started this year. First of all, being our Agency for Disruptive Innovations, the Sprint, Agentur für Sprunginnovationen. We started it, and it should jump high, but we put stones at the feet. So we gave them a freedom. We're giving them more freedom now, more flexibility, more possibility to act similar to the ARPA system in the US. That's one. And our second flagship is the German Agency for Transfer and Innovation. It is not a house with bricks and stones where hundreds of bureaucrats sit, but it is out of the ecosystem. And we started our pilot there. It's very easy. You pitch, you get funding, and at the end of the funding period, I mean, we have a pilot, so of course the projects are still developing, and only at the end of the funding you have to report. We will get the exact figures during this week, but the pilot, where we expected a certain number of applications, I mean, our server nearly broke down when we had the application. So there is a need for this freedom when it comes to knowledge transfer and the bridges. Bureaucracy, regulation, getting IP out of a university when it takes 3 years. The market is elsewhere, you've despaired, you've do something else. So there are lots of different pieces of the mosaic that we have to put together, because I think we have all the potential, we have all the talent, we just have to pave the way. There's much more, but maybe with regard to times, looking at the time. Shall I answer to the language skills? yes, of course, we need language skills. This is one of the focal points when we strengthened our international department and the unit that looks after our Asian relationships. And this is, for example, when I travel to partners like Taiwan, I always encourage to support us in building up language skills here. Because yes, we all have to make our own pictures and we have to understand, in a relationship, what the relationship is based on to get the full picture. I think this is just fair because it's part of transparency. So we do have certain, it's one of the focal points, one of our actions we take in there. So we encourage and we also support in project lines to build up the language skills.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm looking at hands, and we will certainly bring you back, Professor Edler. If you want to come in immediately, that's also good. Yes, please. Yeah.
I want to take the opportunity to maybe add one more point in terms of transfer. It also has to do, of course, with acceleration of small company startups that are ready, but they don't get the first market. And a small anecdote, I was giving a prize in Karlsruhe, Italy, half a year ago, to in a competition for the best startup. And they had enormous potential on the market, and they won all the kind of prizes that there are. And they had all the grants that you can get. And I talked to them and said, why doesn't it? And he said, eventually he said, well, the first contract is more important than the last grant. But he couldn't get into the public market. So it was a small startup, and they just go from public to public, and it was about some kind of virus detection. And the public market, because it was small, because it was new, it was risky, was closed for them. The first, public procurement of innovation, I mean, it's a hobby horse of mine, but that is part of knowledge and technological transfer, and we have to do something about it. And what happens in Co-Inno is not what Co-Inno, the agency that you have in the BMWK, is not fit for purpose, but that's a different discussion. In terms of Chinese, I mean, I totally, well, it's streamed, I'm sorry. And I totally agree, I mean, with the language skill, but it's more than language. I mean, you focus on the language, but language is culture, it's understanding, it's much, much more than that. And, well, I mean, I think we should keep up, we should do what he said, we should take advantage of this in both directions. But at the moment, it seems the kind of rhetoric we have with China is it actually a promoter of my career in the future if I have this China expertise? Do I get the support I need in a country where the academic freedom index has gone down dramatically? What does it mean to work in such a system? Do we get these people the kind of support? So mobility schemes with support on location, much more support structures. It's a bit broader, but I think we have to be positive in terms of building up a career prospect almost, and it's not at the moment.
Thank you. In light of time, we want to collect one or two questions and then wrap up the panel today, because I know the Minister has important business. It's our budget week in Germany, so that's absolutely critical. And I want to start with our colleague here in front. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm Kun from South Korea. You briefly mentioned that you don't want to use or admit the term deglobalization. But the globalization is almost kind of over, and we see rise of protectionism, and WTO is almost stopped working. So then how would you characterize current world economy if it's not deglobalization?
Okay, big question. Last chance for one more question here in the room. If not, I want to pose one to everyone on the panel, because we need to then come to a close, and maybe you could combine these two questions. I want to start with Barry Norton and then go to Professor Edler and back to you, Minister, for your last word. If there's one thing, and you mentioned already basically attracting Chinese scientists as a key challenge and opportunity actually for us Europeans, but also Americans. But what is it that you think we need to get right in terms of understanding and engaging with the Chinese innovation ecosystem as we move forward? If you wanted to point out one or two or the big issues that we think we should focus on to wrap us up here tonight. And that same question goes to you, Professor Edler. You have more time to think about it.
That's a really, really tough
microphone.
question. I guess it's a little bit of a strategic answer, but it's to be aware that there is a centralized, it's not working, is it? There we go. It's just my stupidity and not pushing the button. We need to incorporate the understanding that there is a centralized direction in China that imposes limits on collaboration and is very strategically responding to opportunities and what they see as threats in the world outside. And so it's game theory. You know, it's not like we're going to be able to say, here are the fences, and they're not going to change. We have to be sort of much more subtle and responsive. And I think one other thing is, we don't want there to be two scientific worlds, but there will be. There are already two internets. There are probably going to be two, smart transportation systems. AI is going to drive us further apart, and I think we need to be aware of that.
I think that's already partly a question to the globalization point that was made. But Professor Edler, your final thoughts on this panel tonight? Well, now you have that one.
It's contagious. For me, I mean, I totally agree with all of that, and there's nothing really clever you can say now, but can we not try, in this kind of basket analogy, to think a bit more about the commonalities that we still have? Even in this conference, we have not talked much about the commonalities in terms of the challenges and transformation. It was all about, total product factor productivity and so on, and all the risk and military, and it's all important. But in the very end, there are transformations out there that are. I mean, the Chinese love their children too. They want them to live in a better world, and we want our children to live in a better world. So having all these risks, keeping all the risks in mind, and all this. I mean, everything, of course, that has been said in that one basket, but maybe focus a little bit more on the positive basket.
That's a very optimistic take here. Thank you so much for that. And final words go to the Minister. You have a new China strategy in the government. The ministry has its own plans, priorities for you in the immediate implementation phase that is now starting. Or if you wish, also the question on the state of globalization, which is a big one.
Absolutely. I start with the globalization because it is something that should worry us, because we need more cooperation. First of all, economically, it brings wealth around the globe if we work together. And also global challenges need global partnerships to be addressed. You talked about transformation. So there is more need in terms of economic affairs. We have to more trade agreements and things like that. We really have to come back and find the partners who are willing on the terms of reciprocity and so on. So it needs to be done. And when it comes to research, it's so international. First of all, you can't put up the barriers, but you have to put in the guardrails. And when it comes to the strategy that we're following, I think, as it was said, it is game theory. So much has happened over the past 10, 15 years, and there will be happening so much in the next 10, 15 years. So we have to continuously work on that with all the stakeholders, as I said, like MERICS, and get our knowledge better up. And I think when we have a broad consensus about the guardrails, like, for example, not working together in very sensible areas, touching our security or economic security, putting guardrails in terms of asking for reciprocity or avoiding dependencies, I think this is the most important thing, because that will give us the strength then to adjust our collaboration, terms of collaboration in the future. And as I said, we have all the potential in Europe and with the partners worldwide. And maybe also positive outlook, because you said AI and things will separate us, but again, it is a competitive advantage if we have trustworthy AI and transparent AI with less biases, or hopefully no biases. I think that is again a factor for being competitive. And so cooperation on global challenges and keeping up our own strength.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Professor Edler. Thank you, Professor Barry Norton, for, I think, a wide-ranging conversation tonight. Thanks to the audience for joining us for this symposium, which is now concluding with a nice dinner here next door, at least a reception. And we would like to thank also our partners at the UCSD Institute of Global Cooperation and Conflict for that wonderful collaboration here. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, and see you later at the reception. Good night.